All right, so today what I want to cover is the rendering part of the product assignment. This is where cinema, there you are, product. So this is my shot that I have. For whatever reason that one didn't load, so I'm just going to delete it for now and then scoot that one into position. Okay, so I have my products here. They have textures on them, materials. For my lights, I added two lights. One of them, or they're both area lights, or these rectangle lights. Some programs will call them rectangle lights. Some programs call them area lights. They're area lights. And the way that these work is that they light up the area from there. Depending on how big this is, that will control my shadows. Okay, some of this may be repeat information, but it's more important now on a product because you're really kind of focusing in on those areas of, you know, what the shadows look like, what do the colors look like. I'm going to delete my background and my floor, so we're not going to use that one. Looking through that camera. Okay. I also have a light inside of, let me delete the sky one I have. Where's my lathe now? There. Top diffuser, there it is. Did I put a light inside that? Oh, it looks like there's a light inside here. But there's not a light inside there. Oh, there it is. Yeah, there it is. So here's a light I added inside this just to give it a little bit more illumination from the inside, especially based on how this one was kind of set up. When you look at any of the stuff, you really want to look at any product renderings and go with something that is similar to the kind of style that you're looking for. So there's no specific requirements as to what the end product is going to look like. But you will have a still image and you will have a animated sweep of this. So something like this is very appropriate because these products are typically products that would be laying down. It would be weird if they were standing up straight. Not weird, but just typically you would see them like that. Okay. So something like this, I'm going to view the image. Come on. I'll download the image. If I look at it, I can see that on this side there's a light coming in, and then on this side there's also another light coming in. And I can tell that because there's two reflections basically along that side of it. There may also be like a light on the top that's just kind of giving it a little bit of light this way. So if I was to look at this, I would basically have a light on this side of my scene, a light on that side of my scene, and maybe a light like back here. There's no specific one setup is going to work for everything, especially if you look at any of the photography that people have done for products. If you look at any product photography setups here, you'll see there's a lot of different ways that people will set up their lighting. I just type in lighting. There we go. So here's one kind of lighting setup for this. Notice how they have this like continuous backdrop, and then they have these two lights coming in here. The two lights from the sides, those are your main lights. They may have different powers, so typically one's going to be a stronger light than the other one. And then this backdrop not only helps separate the item from the rest of the scene, but also helps kind of bounce some of that light from the back of this. Okay. Here's another lighting setup. There's a light here, a light there, and a light up top. Here's another one where it's just lit from the top, and you can see how dramatic this kind of lighting is. Here's another one where you have these lights kind of coming in through panels from the sides and the top, and that's kind of like illuminating everything there, so you're getting bounce light. Here's another one where it's just natural daylight coming in here, bouncing around this area, and creating that. Here's another one with this tent lighting in there. Okay, so there's no specific one lighting setup is going to work across the board. Okay, so you really have to be aware of different lighting setups and different things you're trying to communicate. So when you look at a car, and cars are really good because especially we're around here, studio. You'll see they have these huge panels for these cars. And the reason they have those huge panels is because they want to get the highlight to run basically from the start of the car, up the hood, over the ceiling or roof of it, and then down the back. And that's the only way you can get that is by having these huge, massive lights. And you can see that right here. This light, that's where that's coming from, okay? So as you start lighting your product will be different lighting depending on how you're setting up your stuff. So for this specific one, it worked out best for my situation to have one light here and one light there. Now, I still need to have some sort of background for this. Now, if you look at backgrounds for different products, you'll see, again, different ways that people have set this up. This one, it's a completely black background, but you'll see that it's seamless. There is no line right here. And we're basically going from, if you broke it down into the coloring, it looks like it's pretty white in front, and then it's like a dark gray, and then it's white up top again. Okay, so it's kind of like a gradation. This one is very similar probably to the one that we did before, where we have basically just like a red all over the place. Here's another one where it's completely black, and then we have this cool reflection at the bottom. Here's another one where we have this reflection at the bottom, really crisp reflection compared to this one. This one's a little bit fuzzier. This one's crisper. And then we have this light hitting here, and if you look at the highlights, you'll see where the lights are coming in on these. Now this one is actually, it looks like a compilation. This looks really weird being right there because why is there a reflection like right on top of it? Like if this wasn't there, I think this whole thing would be a lot more unified. Here's another one, really black, dark area here. No, there is a border, but it's not a hard border, it's like a soft edge. And then we have this orange light. You'll see there's some reflection down there. There's no reflection, but we have, again, a continuous background. Okay, so you have to go out there and look for images that are kind of resembling what it is you're after for your specific shot. Okay. All right, so these will be just a couple things. So on my lights, typically one light is going to be stronger. So this light here that I created is my main light. Its intensity is at 100. The shadows are set to area lights. This light, the intensity is still set to 100, but because it's smaller, it's not as bright. And its shadows are off. I don't want to have two shadows competing. One of the cool things about 3D that we get is we can turn shadows off on lights and turn shadows on lights. And in some instances, you may even have a light that is just casting shadows and not lighting up anything in the scene. Sometimes you will do that. All right, now I still want to add something else to this. I'm going to add a sphere to this just so we can see this. So let's say that I had a perfectly chrome sphere. So I'm going to take my color off. I'm going to go to my reflectance, set this to Beckman, take my reflection strength all the way up, take the roughness all the way down. Okay, so now I have this chrome sphere inside my scene. Let me turn that off. Oh, no, that was it. All right, so I'm going to render this image. Oops, I'm rendering a sequence because I didn't change my settings. Current frame, yes, 960 by 540. I'm turning off my extra features here. All right, I'm going to leave this at standard for now just so we can see this. There we go. All right, so this is what it looks like under the standard render. And what we're going to see is that the reflection isn't going to come off. Even though we have stuff in our scene, it's not reflecting anything because way up here, there's nothing up there. It's reflecting the lights. It's reflecting these bottles, and you can kind of see that inside there. It's not actually reflecting the lights, just reflecting the bottle caps. So we need something else to kind of give it a little bit more punch. So I'm going to make an environment here. So under the floor area, typically you find the floor, I'm going to add an environment. And on this environment, I'm going to create a material. And there's no reflection on this. It's just going to be a texture. Now, what I want to find is basically a 360-degree environment. So if I go to Google and I type in free HDRI, this will take me to HDRI Heaven or Sybil Labs, HDR Labs. Either one of these, or maybe even this one, you may find a perfect image. Now what we're looking for is something that would give us the look of the environment. Okay, so if we're shooting something, this is what we want to have. What does the rest of the room look like? Because all of these things are playing into what that card's end result is going to look like. Even like this black card here, they may use that black card and hold it up in a spot to cancel out a reflection. Okay? Same thing here, the lights that are here, the lights that are up there, all of this stuff is really playing into getting that card to look the way it looks. So these are all HDRs that we can use for that kind of thing. HDR Labs is good, HDR Haven is good. There's other ones out there too. These ones are all free, and that's why I point you to them. There's ones that you can pay for. There's ones that are lower resolution. We really don't want those. This one is actually pretty new, and they've had some pretty good stuff. So here's 7 different studio shots that they have. And you may find none of these are exactly what you want, but because we're not making our own, we can just kind of find one that works. You know, maybe we want our products, here's a small studio. So if I just download this, where's my download button? There it is. I want to download the 4K image. I could download 8K or 16K, and those are higher resolution, but the software, it's kind of like overkill. We don't need it, okay? So I would download this 4K image. I'm going to cut that. I'm going to put it inside of my textures folder for my product, textures, paste. Okay. So this is not just a 360, this is an HDR. So basically what they do is they go into a room, they take a bunch of pictures all the way around at different exposure settings, and then they slam everything together into one image. So this image, even though it's a 360, actually has lighting information and shadow information for this exact shot. So I'm going to go back into Cinema, and I'm going to find that image. Oops, I put it in a different folder, that's why. Let's copy that, paste that, there we go. Cool. All right, so now when I render this, yes, go ahead. What I should get, oops, after I assign the material to the environment, there we go. Why aren't you showing up? What did I do wrong? That's on, yes. This. Oh, because I put it on color, that's why. I want it on luminance. Did I click the wrong one? Wrong environment? Oh no, sorry, I wanted sky, not environment. Delete that, drag the material to the sky. There we go. Okay, so now that I have that chrome sphere in there, and I have this sky environment, not environment, sky environment, I'm getting the reflections from that thing inside it. And you can see it's also picking up the reflections from this, picking up the reflections from that. My reflections overall will look better, my lighting overall will look better. I don't want to see this environment in there because that looks weird. I only want to see it in a reflection. And I may not even want it that strong. Okay, here it's really weird because it's so chromy. I don't want that. So I'm going to add a compositing tag to this. And I'm going to say it's fine to cast shadows. I really don't need it to receive shadows. And I don't want this seen by the camera. Okay? And so not being seen by the camera means that when I hit the render button, it will render the reflections, it'll render the shadows or lighting information it's providing, but it will not show the actual item in the background. Okay? So now we can put basically whatever we want as our background. All right, so we'll stop that. So for this one, I'm going to create a seamless backdrop. So many ways to do this. I start off with a cube typically, and I scale it up so that it's an appropriate size. Don't go small with this because you really want to make these kinds of things huge to really get the effect. That's too high. Okay, so I'm going to hit C, I'm going to go to Faces, and I'm going to delete these here. I'm also going to push this back some and pull this out some. Okay, now look at how tiny my items are compared to this backdrop. If I go too small on this, when I'm zoomed in, oops, can't even see my items because they're hidden. There we go. When I'm zoomed in here and I'm having my camera, let's say, move from one side to the other, I want to make sure that I don't see the edge of this. And I have to go pretty far to see the edge of that. So I'm pretty good for how big this is. Now this is not seamless yet. If I rendered this out, I would get a hard edge right there. And just so you can see, there's the hard edge. Now, just like I showed, some of them, like the hard edge works. If I had an item that was more rugged and manly, a hard edge might work good. But something like this, which is more softer, you know, relaxing, I probably don't want to have that hard edge. So I'm going to go to the edge here. I'm going to grab this, and I'm just going to put a bevel on it. There we go. And maybe make this a little bit bigger. Maybe add a couple more divisions. Yep, that works. And then I have to do one more thing. If I look at this, you'll see a definite like line. You can see it up there, right here where this connects with that. So I'm going to go to this cube's Fong up here and just turn off the angle limit. And you'll see that that gets rid of those hard edges there, because it just keeps all the edges nice and soft. So now when I render this, yes. Now I have a nice, soft, sweeping backdrop. Now I have to be careful too. If I have my light hitting this thing and the backdrop is too close, I might see a shadow around it. I don't want that shadow around it, so I would push the backdrop further back. I also have my items are floating. I need to fix that as well. So I'm going to push the backdrop back a little bit further. There we go. I'm also going to switch into a side view. And then I will see that my backdrop actually looks like it's rotated. Is it? It is. I accidentally moved it down apparently. So I will rotate this so that it is flat. I'm going to hit L so I can move my pivot, and I'll move my pivot down here. There we go. And then I will go to rotate and just rotate this like that. Cool. And then I'll scoot it down so that it's sitting at the bottom. And there we go. Let me delete this. I don't need that anymore. You'll see how I do constant renders. I'm changing something, rendering it, changing something, rendering it, because I need to see what changes I just did, what effect is that having on my stuff. My lighting in my scene, my HDR that I chose, you'll see a huge difference in your stuff if you choose a bad HDR. I've had images where I've picked an HDR, threw it on there, and it turned out like horribly like garbled. You couldn't really see anything. It was very muddy. Pick a different HDR that has more contrast, and everything just popped a bit more. Okay, so it really does depend on that. Now this is what the HDR is for. If you look in here, we're getting some nice reflections on there from the HDR. We can't see what it is, and that's perfect. We just want to see some sort of environment in there. Now, if this back one was chrome, that would look kind of weird. So I would definitely try to pick something that was more appropriate to like a studio setting. Cool. And you'll see this is going to take a little bit longer to render. All right. I probably should have a color on that backdrop. So let's go and grab a color, drop it on the background. Take the reflectance off. And just give this a solid white color. And again, just like when we did our environments, when you render stuff out, there's no harm in lowering your resolution or lowering your settings just to test it out. Another thing we can do, I'm going to hit escape. as I render this, I'm going to go to my render settings. I'm not going to use standard because it limits me to the options. I'm going to use physical. And one of the options under physical is I'm going to first set this to preview. I'm going to change my sampler here to progressive. And what that will do is it will change how it renders. Instead of rendering these little buckets, is what they're called, in a circle, it'll render the entire screen really fuzzy and then gradually get better and better and better. Okay? So now when I hit render, we should see the whole thing right there, and then it gradually gets better. Okay? So it's just a matter of, do you want to see it, like, I need to see crystal clear what it looks like in this one section, or am I fine looking at it like this? And I'm fine for this instance looking at it like that. Yep, so that's totally washed out in the back, so that's like way too bright. So maybe I take this color and knock it down to like a gray or something, or maybe I add some reflectance to it, and I add some roughness to this and pull that down some. It's too much reflection. There we go. And especially as beginners, you have to try this stuff out. You may not use it this time, but next time you use a product, you're like, hey, I remember this one time I did whatever, and that worked out pretty good. Now, pretending that I don't want this to be as white, like it's like crazy bright. This works for this, but I could also move it backwards. I think I'll move it back. So I take this and my scene got rotated. Where am I still my camera? I am. There we go. I'm just going to grab the points here and there. And then I'll also go to my object, go to my scale. Scale that out. I need to raise it way up. Let's grab that edge. And usually what I do if I get too far out, I'll just grab an item, hit frame, and then I'm right back in there. There we go. So this may help kind of knock that brightness down. Maybe it was too bright because we were so close to the light, or maybe that didn't do anything at all. It didn't look like it did anything at all. All right, maybe I just still need to darken that material some. Go to my color, knock this color down. Yep, that's much better. Okay, now I can see my shadow a bit more, so then I can adjust where my shadow is. Okay, so we're going to pretend that for now this is what we want. So I'm going to set up two cameras. So let me delete these cameras I have here. And camera here, look through the camera. I'm going to set up this camera to be, let's say, 120. And this is going to be a still image, so I need to go to my render settings, I need to go to my output, and eventually this render size is going to be 3000 by 2400, okay? Or 2400 by 3000, depending on which orientation you want to go. Vertically or horizontally, it's up to you with that one. Current frame is fine. All right, so now if I look at these bars here, that's where I need to render. That's where I need to frame my stuff. So I need to be aware, hey, this is the front of my backdrop. If I render this, I'm going to see that front of my backdrop just like open. I don't want that to look stupid. Sorry, close that. And then I switch around. Oops, I don't want to move my camera. Oh, I already moved it, so I'm kind of committed to moving it now. This. All right, let's put that back in frame. There we go. Let's jump out of that. Let's grab the edge for why don't you let me grab the edge for that? Edge, this, there we go. Now I can jump back in the camera. Good. I may need to lower it. It's still a little bit off there. So somehow I rotated that. It might be easier just to remake that whole shape. We'll see. I want to make sure my objects aren't floating. Typically people forget about that. There we go. And you'll see at the bottom it says quick preview pass 4 of 5. Okay, so it's going to do 5 passes. We're on 4 of 5 now. Okay, I'm going to stop that. I'm going to double check in my side view that nothing is floating. It definitely is floating still. So let me jump to this view. Yes. Okay, so I'm going to get close here so I can see these things and use the arrow to move this up. There we go. So now that should be right at the bottom. So we're going to pretend that that's I'm happy with that look. I'm going to go to my tags, go to cinema, go to protection. Okay, so that camera's not moving. In this case, we really don't have a whole lot of depth of field stuff. In some cases, you might. In some cases, you may have a background or a line there that you want to fuzz out. So remember, I went through all of those things in the environment one where we showed how we can use, the depth of field here, that focus distance there, and then using physical depth of field here. I don't have depth of field, so I can just turn that off. I also turned on ambient occlusion, so I went to effect, and I added ambient occlusion to this. It's not in the list anymore because I already added it. Yep, that's good. I also added object glow, just because that item in there, it looked a little bit better when it glowed. Now with a little bit different lighting setup, different HDR, maybe I don't need it. So what I would do is I go through, make sure all my settings are at their max. Okay. Pretending I've gone through several iterations of this, I'm happy with the way this is turning out. I go to my physical, I set this to adaptive, set this to high, set this to save, and then tell it where to save. So this will be Sarcona, oil, diffuser, product. Save it as a TIFF, and then render. Now because the settings are cranked up, this might take an hour, it might take 2 hours to render. That's why I wanted to name it inside there. That way, in case cinema, I have to leave, I go to another class, I come in, or someone else comes in, they go to the computer and shut it down, they don't save anything, at least it's still saved to that folder. And you can see how slow this is going to go, okay? So I'm just going to hit escape and let it do its thing, okay? So I'll set that to render out when I'm all done. Camera 2 that we're going to have, I'm going to make a new one. I'll look through that one, deselect it so I can actually move. For this one, I want to focus in on an object. I want to rotate the camera from one side of my view to the other side of my view, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my camera so it's in a different aspect ratio. So I'm going to go to output. Your still image is 3000 by 2400 or vice versa. The animation is 960 by 540. Anytime we do an animation, that's what it's going to be. Okay, so I'm going to set this up for the start of my animation. So let's say there. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my camera and I'm going to group it to itself. So I do Alt-G. And then I'm going to verify that the pivot for this is at the center of all of this stuff. So if I click my null, I'm going to hit L and move the pivot so the pivot is right in the middle of my scene. And wherever I put this, that's what it's going to be pivoting around. So I'm going to put it right here in the middle of, like, between these two items. Okay, hit L again. And now when I rotate my camera, you'll see how it rotates close. It's not close enough. Let's hit L again, back to the move tool, maybe scoot this down some, hit L again, go back to rotate. That's the wrong direction. There we go. That seems better. Let's just make this view a bit bigger so we can see it. Yeah, I think just that one is just so bulbous on that side. Maybe I'll hit L again and just move it further this way then. There we go. So that'll be sufficient, okay? So now I'm going to set keyframes on that null for rotation. So I go to the start of my animation, set my rotates. Go to 120, rotate the camera around. Doesn't have to be a big sweep, just to be something. There we go. So there's my animation of the camera. Then I'm just going to go to my animation. I'm going to go to the F curve, and I'm just going to make these linear. And what that does is it just gets rid of any smoothness that would have been on the camera. Oops. Now I still think I want to animate the camera a little bit more. So I'm going to go to my camera itself, set some positional keyframes at the beginning, go to the end, and then set some end keyframes. And this gives me a nice sweep and some nice movement. And again, I'll go through my F curves and make these all linear. All right, that's a perfect camera move. Now my render settings, I'll set this to all frames. I'll go to my save, name.number.extension, which is the bottom one. I'll put the words animation at the end of this. Make sure that my physical is still set to high. Yes. Ambient occlusion is still on. Yes. Hit, make sure I'm in the camera. Hit Shift R, and then I'll let it do its job. Again, this might take, because it's an animation, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. The higher resolution we go, the longer things are going to take. Yes, sir.
Is there a way to figure out how long it's going to take
before you start rendering?
Or even while?
Yep. So if you look at frame 1, when it gets done, let's say it took 23 seconds. Multiply it times 120, you'll roughly get an idea of how long that's going to take. I'm like, what happened to my background? So you can see here already that this is taking obviously a lot longer than 23 seconds. I'm at 45 seconds right now. So again, something you want to be aware of, because this is going to be something that you may have to set the computer and just let it chug, okay? And then once you're done with that, then you'll just take it just like we did the text animations, drop that sequence into Photoshop or into Media Encoder and make a movie out of it. Now another thing I wanted to show, that's pretty much it for that. A lot of it you just have to look at your lighting and look at your stuff. Another thing I want to show is if you wanted to start playing with KeyShot for our drone that we're going to be doing, we're going to be using KeyShot for our final render. So if you wanted to start playing with it, you'll see the benefits of it. Oops. Let me open up my scene file that I have for that one. Okay, let me get rid of my sky, get rid of my cube. There we go. Okay, so what I did in this scene is I prepped everything. So all of my stuff here is all I hit C on it. So there's nothing, there's no deformers, there's no subdivision surfaces, anything like that. Every single item I hit C on so that it's a locked in item. Okay. Then I saved my scene. I saved it as a special like save to KeyShot. And then I went into KeyShot, and the KeyShot is on these computers. You can download a trial at home for KeyShot. You get watermarks, but then I think you can bring it here and still use it. I'm going to go to Import and find that product to KeyShot. I'm going to leave everything as is. Hit Import. And it takes a second to upload. There it is. But here's all my stuff. Now, the KeyShot is a rendering software. So what this allows us to do is all that stuff I just did for rendering inside Cinema, it's right here inside KeyShot. Okay, so if I needed to tweak something as far as the lighting goes, I could do it right here. So let's say that I wanted a different background. I can go to environments. There we go. And here's a bunch of environments. So I can just drag, here's a stairwell. So now it's in a stairwell, right? Here's the reflections for it. Here's this. Let's say I want this one. There we go. So very easily I can drop stuff in there. If I want my, I mean, you can see the glass on this is like already looking good. Here's the startup one, so I can just leave that if I wanted to, or the startup balanced. Here's some zebra stripes. Psychedelic. Okay, so again, I can go through this and just kind of pick out like which one is going to look best on my stuff very quickly without having to really download anything. I can really go through and play this. And you'll see this one that I chose, I think this is that one there. The reflections in this are really soft, especially like on the cap. But when I go to like this one, the reflections are a lot harder than they were. You can see it right here. You can see it right there, okay? Now, pretending I didn't want this background, it has options for that. So I can go to my environment, and I can say instead of using my environment, I want a color. So if I just pick white, that's my seamless backdrop. I can make it black, and now I have a black backdrop. If I want a floor to reflect into it, I can go to Create, where do we create? Or Edit, add geometry. I'm going to add a ground plane. There it is. I'm going to say position this on the ground. There's no like move tools, which kind of sucks, but you just deal with it. I'm going to snap these to the ground. I'm going to rotate this. Okay, I can't see the ground plane because it's like there's no material on it. So I'm going to go to the materials, and I'm going to pick one of these. Let's say that I picked plastic, and I picked hard plastic. Where are you at? There it is. I'm going to pick hard, rough, or hard, shiny plastic. So I just drop it on there. Boom. So now the floor is basically made of hard, shiny plastic. And if I double click it, it lets me go over here to the options, and I could, let's say, take the roughness up. So now I'm still picking up some of those reflections. There we go. So now I have reflections down here, and then I have that, and then I could still set up my cameras and all that stuff. And you'll see what it's doing. That progressive render I did from Cinema, it's still doing it here. This one's floating, so I'm going to go to my scene. It's pretty like easy to move around in this too. I'm going to say snap to ground, and it snaps it to the ground. Go to the wood one, snap that one to the ground. Go to all my oil cap ones, snap those to the ground. You'll notice my textures didn't show up. This is one of the issues that KeyShot has. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So I'm going to double click on my texture, so just on that label. I'm going to go to my textures tab, and I'm going to go and load that texture in there. It doesn't like TGAs, so I had to go through and resave them all as Photoshop or as TIFFs. So I'm going to load that one in as a TIFF, and it doesn't show up. So I have to say then, what did I do? Did I shift it? Yes. Yep. So I'm going to go and set this to UV, yes. Shift it in the V direction. And it should be showing up. Let me reset this. 0, 0, yes. Repeat, repeat. I'm just being stupid now. It doesn't want to show up. It was there a second ago. I'm going to switch this from UV to cylinder and hit part. There it is. So here it is on the part. Now I guess I'll just manually move this. 100 should be good. It came in backwards, so I'm going to flip it horizontally. There we go. Sweet. And I would just do that for each one of these. I would grab the next label, go to textures, find the texture again, lime label. Still doesn't want to come in, so I'll hit cylinder, part, set this to 100. Come on. And then flip it, not vertically, flip it horizontally. Okay, so even for that one back there, I could add a texture here, which is my wood. Set this to cylinder, part. And I'm going to add on my, there's no alt for this, you just drag, click and drag with left mouse, middle mouse, and right mouse. There we go. I'm going to go to labels. I had a label on this, and I'm going to add a label in here. There's my label. It comes in all wonky, so then I have to go down here. Once it lets me scroll down. I'm doing too much on the computer. Doesn't like it. I guess I'll just do it manually. So I'm just going to move this and scale it. Change the width. There it is. And then just move this down. And then flip it horizontally. And then scale it again. And what's neat about this is that you could do like one on top of another, on top of another, on top of another. You don't have to worry about the UVs so much when you're doing it like this. Oops. We just need them for obviously cinema to get that to work. Come on. There we go. Move this down here. Flip this horizontally. All right, now this also has stuff under the lighting where you could add, or you can set this for different kinds of lighting. So I can turn on global illumination, which will add bounce lights to this. I could turn on caustics, which means that my reflections here will, or my light coming in here will give it a little bit of coloration to that. I can go under camera. I can change the kind of camera that I have. I could turn on depth of field, select my focal point right there, and then lower my f-stop. And you can see how intuitive it is. Like, it literally is like that easy to use. The animation sucks in it, but everything else is good. If I go to image, I can add effects. So things like blooming. So you'll see that some of these items are kind of glowy. There's like a little bit of softness to them. You could add that. I could also add a vignette to this. You can adjust some of your coloration right in here. So if you wanted to tweak some of this, typically I'll leave all that for Photoshop. And then if I'm going to render this, I can go to render and say, let me go to lighting first and set this to product. There we go. Then go to render. And the settings are pretty simple. If I'm doing a still image, I type in the stuff. So still image product. Tell it where I want it to go. 3000 by, doesn't do 3000 by 2450. This is another issue that I have with the software. It always like locks it. We have to play with the different spots, but I could render it out bigger and then just crop it. Go to my options here, set my samples up really high, and then render it out. And you'll see even just this is a lot more, a lot nicer looking, a lot quicker than we were inside cinema. When you look at any of the stuff that people are rendering, they're typically using KeyShot for rendering. All of this stuff is all KeyShot rendering. That's why we're going to do our drone in it for sure, just so you can get some experience with it, because it's a hugely beneficial program. If I don't like, let's say, the cap color on these, I can just go to like a hard, shiny white plastic, drop this onto my caps, and now my caps have a hard, shiny white plastic. If I wanted them to be glass, I can go to glass, I can say solid glass, and just drop this, let's say on this thing. And now that is made out of glass. And I can just switch my focal point to that so I can see it. It's gorgeous. Okay, and there's other stuff too you can do. You can do animations in it. I'm not going to go through everything. We'll get to that when we do our other stuff. But again, I just wanted you to be able to see it because it's such an awesome tool. Cool. All right, so your turn-ins for this will be your images. So you'll have, oops, where's my images? Oh, I have it on my other drive. In temp, in here, product, renders. I don't have it in my renders. Well, anyway, you'll have an image that's 3000 by 2400 rendered in Cinema or Keyshot. And then you'll have your movie that you also turn in. Cool? Questions?